What is going on, YouTube? This is Jim back with another video, here to give you guys my thoughts on Oddworld Soulstorm. I'm going to be talking about graphics and gameplay and if there is any 3D audio implementation and just overall sound design as a whole. But before I get into that, I would love for you guys to subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate the support. So, Oddworld Soulstorm is a very odd game. I mean, it is in the name after all. And while I have to admit the characters didn't grow on me the way that I thought they would, they have their own unique charm and personality to them. The voice acting is very well done, despite the fact that almost every character in this game talks with some sort of weird speech impediment or some sort of nervous tic, or something different about them. This is not your standard, triple A, voice actors, very recognizable people. This is very processed, very odd sound, but I think it works. I definitely have to say that Abe grew on me over time. Initially, I found him really annoying and kind of weaselly, but as I did kind of play through the game, I did start to kind of feel for him a little bit and kind of what he was up to. Unfortunately, this is where I really kind of lost interest in this game. I wasn't a big fan of the mechanics. I don't mind 2D games at all. And they call this a 2.5D. I'm really not sure what that means. But I don't object to side-scrolling games or really kind of these pseudo-stealth, pseudo-action adventures, pseudo-puzzle platforming experiences. I mean, I was a big fan of the Assassin's Creed Chronicles series, and I thought that was very well done. I thought it told a very engrossing narrative, and gameplay was difficult, even though it was only on a 2D plane. Here, I find it difficult for different reasons, and most of them relate to the fact that the game mechanics themselves just don't really seem to work that well. A majority of the time you're going to be running around, you're either going to be sneaking or platforming or throwing bottles at things. A lot of people jokingly call this the bottle throwing simulator, and I think you can start to understand why. Your primary ranged weapon is going to be some sort of bottle that interacts with the environment. Now, this is where I think the first problem comes in. There are strategically placed campfires that you can throw these kind of fire bottles at, which will explode into a blaze, which will hurt enemies and sometimes burn down like doors or something, so you can progress through onto the next area. The problem, though, is when you're done lighting things on fire, you immediately have to turn around and use water bottles to douse the flames. So, unlike other games where the fire kind of dissipates to allow you to progress, you have to constantly clean up after yourself. And it does kind of break the experience when you've had a really epic moment where you're throwing and chaining fire together to take out different enemies, like at a specific time. And then ultimately you're getting hit by this cleanup action that requires you to stop and clear the way out for yourself. And that just doesn't really relate to really much fun. Because ultimately what ends up happening, I feel like, with these kind of like bottles, is that you're constantly stopping the action. You're taking time to pause, and you're taking time to kind of clean up the level. And it ruins the experience in such a jarring way. Now, that's not to say that the explosions aren't fun and it does relate to some puzzle element. It's just odd that they would include this built-in mechanic where most games just kind of allow you to progress. That doesn't really happen in this game, unfortunately. The other big offense you're going to have, which you see me playing with here, is the possession, where you're going to basically be able to channel any enemy and basically control them. Which is great because you can have them walk off cliffs, you can have them shoot each other, you could have them do stupid things to hurt themselves, which will allow you to progress, which is really kind of nice. And you're going to be doing that quite a bit. Now, the good thing with the possession is 9 times out of 10, the enemy you're possessing is going to be treated as a throwaway. So there's really no penalty for you not having full control over your character. The reason I say that and specifically mention control is because this game has a very rough control system to it. Jumps feel very sloppy and loose. There are times that the game will snap you over, whether it be vertically or horizontally, to grab onto a ledge or to pick up an item or to loot a barrel for more, vials or craftable type things. But it's not like mapped very well, and you're gonna feel it feels sloppy. That's the best way I could describe it. I think back to, if you guys ever played the old 2D Prince of Persia, back from like the Super Nintendo days, where you had that modifier where you could hold down one of the triggers and just take a step forward, kind of like I'm doing here with Abe, to kind of line up into a jump, and sometimes you have to turn around and jump up and snap onto things. That felt more intuitive. That's a 20-plus-year-old system. That felt more intuitive than this. There were so many times I missed jumps where I knew that's what I actually had to do, but yet the game didn't seem to register that I was jumping. There were times that I would throw something, and where the targeting reticle was versus where the actual impact occurred was different. So even though the targeting reticle looks like you're going to throw a bottle right on the fire, you'd actually have to like throw it before the fire so that it would actually hit it, because that seems to be off a little bit as well. And it's frustrating that a game that is so reliant on 2D platforming mechanics, which you're going to be doing a lot of, jumping and climbing and rolling through things, disarming bombs, trying to avoid sentries, that sort of thing. It's so frustrating that it is so reliant on a control scheme that just doesn't hold up. And it starts to really fall apart as every chore starts to feel like a chore, and it shouldn't. It should be a game. It should be fun. This should be intuitive. This should be an experience you blast through because you're laughing, and some of the content, while be a little bit mature, it's still fun and goofy and zany. You're never going to get that rhythm going because you're constantly going to be struggling with the controls. The other problem is in a 2D space, and I think this game does a very poor job of this, is the overall pacing. Look at how many different actions I need to do in order to clear this very small area. So you have to crawl over and detonate those bombs, or prevent the bombs rather from detonating by crawling up to them and doing a button prompt when they're on a green setting, which is okay. Then you have to possess enemies. You kind of have to start clearing enemies out by having enemies shoot other enemies. And you have to kind of do this for a while. Your meter of how long you can channel things eventually will run out, or the enemies will kill each other off, which is fine. It's just a very long, monotonous, Rube Goldberg-esque way to clear through every area where you're just possessing and walking through. And I think that's the limitation of a 2D system, where you don't necessarily have a lot of tools. You don't have a melee per se. You're a very helpless character. So you're kind of relying on the environment to kind of clean itself out, whether it be enemies, killing each other, whether it being, you throwing a fire bottle at something, possessing people, whatever. It just gets to be this chore where, like, you're kind of almost removed from the action because all the fun stuff is not revolving around your character. And despite the fact that, he's voiced well, and despite the fact that, it looks pretty, you're going to constantly be doing stuff like this where you're possessing things way off screen, or you're navigating through these very tight corridors to summon something, or to open a door to get an enemy or whatever. But you're not going to be having fun doing all this because it's like a race against the clock, and it's like this pseudo puzzle mechanic that was kind of injected into the game that just doesn't really feel that rewarding. I mean, that little area I went through, you're talking, 5 or 6 enemies that I had to navigate through. You saw kind of my final playthrough here. I spent a good 20 or 30 minutes trying to figure out the most optimal way, because what happens is a lot of times the enemies will kill each other, and then they'll appear in a place where you can't get to them. You can't possess them because those things prevent you from possessing sometimes. So you kind of have to wait for enemies to cycle around, because basically you get hit once and you're dead. You have to kind of take your time and work your way through the system, and it just feels more like a chore than anything else. And it really does ruin it for me. I think that's what really turned me off after completing this area, moving on to the next area. You just start to realize that this game is just a very slow play. when I feel like it could be more like a Rayman or a Mario type with a little more action to it if they gave you better systems in which to fight people. So, not a huge fan of that. Now, graphically, as you can see, this is streamed from my PlayStation 4, my PlayStation 5. It runs beautifully. I really had no graphical hiccups or hitches or anything like that. I think the game does a really good job of putting you in a great environment. There's wonderful, wonderful CGI scenes that kind of bookend. There's a lot of storytelling to this, a lot of discussion, kind of really setting up the plot. I think the first 20 or so minutes is basically just a movie. But it's got that like Pixar quality to it. It's, like I said, it's voice acted very well. The animation is crisp and clean and clear. There's really short loading times. So I think they're taking advantage of the horsepower behind the PlayStation 5, which I appreciate. Lastly, that gets me to the sound design. And I was really excited for this game, thinking, okay, we're going to get like a tried and true kind of PlayStation, console experience, great 3D sound, and unfortunately, no. This game doesn't really do anything at all with the Tempest 3D engine, which honestly, if there was a game to do it, a 2D game makes the most verbal sense, in the sense that you have a very clearly defined left and right channel. I feel like you could have done a lot with sound and where enemies could hear you, and a really nice play on a sound engine. But unfortunately, no. Tempest actually seems to make things worse, get very bassy, very muddy, very similar to what I saw with Black Ops Cold War, very similar to what I saw with Assassin's Creed Valhalla in terms of some of the 3D sound. I wasn't really impressed by that, and that's unfortunate. I think that could have been something they improved on. Ultimately, would I recommend this game? I mean, well, it's free, so it's hard to say don't play it. It costs you nothing, assuming you're a PlayStation Plus member, which I suspect most people who own a PlayStation 5 at this point are. So I would say check it out. I have a feeling, though, unless you're a super fan of this series, you're willing to kind of like trudge through all these technical issues to kind of see where the story goes. I suspect you're going to be like me, and you're just going to play for, I think I played maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I wasn't feeling it. I kept waiting for it to turn into something better. I kept waiting for that one mechanic or that one interesting thing which would make the game more fun, and it never quite gets there for me. Even when you start to get into later on, when you are, starting to direct more than just your character, it just doesn't seem to be a rewarding game. I feel like they did too many things. It's like, well, we're going to be a platformer, we're going to be a puzzle game, we're going to be a stealth game, we're going to be a serious, they really almost needed to treat this like an indie game. That's the way I think they should have treated this. This should have been something where it's like, okay, we're going to do 1 or 2 mechanics and we're going to nail the heck out of it. You look at a really solid platformer like Mario or like Rayman, I think they did a really good job. You look at a really solid stealth platformer like Assassin's Creed Chronicles or the older Prince of Persia variants. But then you look at this game and it just seems like they were doing so many things at once. You have so many systems in play, and none of them ever feel like this is what the game is truly about. And for that, I don't know. It wasn't for me. But if you like it, that's awesome. I'm glad. It's just not a game for me, and I think a lot of people are going to maybe start it and say, hey, this is cool, it's pretty, it's polished, and it is. And then they're going to start finding these little technical issues peeking through. The controls starts to get a little muddy, the constant cleanup of burning thing. It's just, I think it's going to wear you down. So with that wraps up my thoughts on this game. I hope you guys found it informative. Leave some comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Did I really miss the boat on this one? Or are you on board with me that this is just not a very good experience? I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thank you very much. Take care of yourselves. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.